I had waited my whole adult life for this moment. The notary's pen slid across the final line, and with that simple flourish of ink, I became the sole owner of a villa on the South Carolina coast. Myrtle Beach glittered through the window of the bank office, sunlight bouncing off the Atlantic, like 1,000 tiny diamonds scattered just for me. At 68, I finally held freedom in my hands. 30 years as head librarian had taught me patience and duty. I had spent nights checking references, mornings guiding students, and entire decades filing other people's words. I'd always told myself that someday I would have a home of my own, where silence was mine alone, where the sound of pages turning would be replaced by the rhythm of waves. Today was that someday. The clerk gathered the stack of documents, slid them into a neat manila folder, and pushed it across the desk. "Congratulations, Mrs. Marwood. She's all yours." I clutched the folder as if it contained treasure, because it did. Every page inside was proof that I had not wasted the best years of my life. With careful fingers, I opened it just to look once more at the title deed. My name typed in bold black letters. Celia Ann Marwood stood tall and undeniable, but halfway down the stack, a page caught my eye. It wasn't like the others. The paper was slightly thinner, the print a shade darker. Across the bottom, in looping cursive, was a signature that looked almost exactly like mine. Almost. I frowned and leaned closer. The C curled too wide, the M dragged too long. I knew my own hand. I had signed my name thousands of times on checkout cards, library forms, even book dedications. This signature was close, eerily close, but not mine. The heading read, "Addendum Property Management Agreement." The words swam for a moment. I hadn't agreed to any management arrangement. I had chosen this house precisely because it was mine alone, not part of some rental scheme. "Excuse me," I asked the clerk, holding up the page. "What is this?" He glanced quickly, then waved a dismissive hand. "Probably a misfile. Sometimes documents get mixed when the copier jams. If it isn't relevant to your purchase, you can disregard it." I slipped it back into the folder, though my chest tightened. My name, my forged name, stared back at me. Outside, the coastal air hit me like a baptism. Salt sun and the promise of solitude. I pressed the folder to my chest and walked slowly toward my car. A few gulls squawked overhead, their wings sharp against the blue sky. For a moment, I let the doubt drift away. Surely it was just a clerical error, nothing more. Paperwork always carried mistakes. Hadn't I corrected 1,000 misprints at the library? Yet as I drove toward my new villa, the thought nagged like a loose thread. Someone had practiced my signature well enough to fool the eye. Why, to what end? The villa appeared at the end of a quiet lane, a 2-story refuge painted a soft seafoam green shutters, the color of driftwood. When I stepped onto the porch, the boards creaked under my feet as if greeting me. I unlocked the door, crossed into the living room, and set the folder on the kitchen counter. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, falling across polished wood floors. Beyond the glass, the ocean shimmered endless and patient. My sanctuary. At last, no neighbors' televisions through thin walls, no endless requests for favors, no compromises. Only me and the sea. I unpacked a single box of books, lining them on a shelf near the window. Dickens, Austen, Baldwin, Morrison. They had been my companions longer than any friend. As I slid the last spine into place, I told myself the odd page in the deed packet was nothing. A slip, a ghost of bureaucracy. And yet when I picked up the folder again, my eyes drifted back to that signature that wasn't mine. The ink curled across the page, familiar yet foreign, like a stranger wearing my face. Who slipped in that paper? And why did it look like my handwriting? The first week in my new home passed in a blur of boxes, sea breezes, and quiet joy. Each morning, I woke to the steady hum of waves, a lullaby in reverse. I brewed coffee in a kitchen that smelled faintly of pine, stepped onto my porch, and told myself, this was what freedom tasted like, bitter and sweet rich with possibility. When Gideon called to say he and Marissa wanted to drive down from Charleston, I felt a twinge of pride. My son had grown into a thoughtful man, if a little hesitant in his choices. Our relationship had been strained since his marriage, but maybe this house could be a bridge. Bring Marissa, I said, trying to sound warm. She should see where you'll be visiting me. They arrived on a cloudless Tuesday afternoon, Marissa's SUV crunching across the gravel drive. She stepped out in oversized sunglasses and a linen dress that fluttered as if she were arriving at a resort, not her mother-in-law's home. Gideon trailed behind, carrying a tote bag. Moments later, another car rolled up, sleek, black, polished. Marissa's parents emerged, Robert and Elaine, both dressed as if for a country club luncheon. I swallowed my surprise. Gideon hadn't mentioned they were coming, but I reminded myself hospitality first. Welcome, I called. But my voice must not have carried because no one turned. They were already heading up the steps, laughter floating ahead of them. I carried a box of photo albums toward the hallway and paused when I heard voices from the second floor. This is the suite, Marissa announced brightly. I could hear her heels clicking against the hardwood. It has the best view of the ocean. I'll take this one. My arms stiffened around the box. She continued, her tone casual, certain. Mom, you'll have the room with the walk-in closet. You'll love it. Plenty of space. I pressed myself against the wall, heart thudding. And Celia, Marissa added, with a laugh that sliced through me, can live in the shed outside. It has electricity. It will be perfect for her. The box slipped a little in my grip. Photo albums shifted, threatening to spill. I held my breath as silence followed. Then Robert chuckled. That seems practical. Elaine murmured agreement. I stood frozen in the hallway, unable to move. The shed, the crumbling outbuilding I'd barely dared to step into. My shed on my property. My name was on the deed. And yet they spoke as if I were already a guest in their summer home, a relic to be stored neatly away. The sound of Gideon's voice finally cut through, low and uncertain. Marissa, but she silenced him with another laugh, brighter this time. It's only fair. We'll handle the big house. I forced my legs forward, carrying the box into the living room, arranging my face into a polite mask. My heart was a storm, but I knew how to steady my expression. Librarians learn the art of calm long before they learn the Dewey Decimal. When they came down the stairs moments later, Marissa stopped short, her sunglasses perched atop her head. Celia, she said smoothly, there you are. We were just admiring your beautiful house. I set the box on the coffee table, arranging the albums with care. Our beautiful house, I corrected softly, though I kept the smile fixed. Her jaw tightened, but only for a moment. She looped her arm through her mother's. Yes, of course. I looked at Gideon, searching his face for an ally. But he avoided my gaze, his eyes on the floor. As laughter resumed and footsteps echoed around my new sanctuary, the words about the shed repeated in my mind, sharper, each time carving into me like glass. Why would Marissa claim my house as hers while I'm still alive? That laugh clung to me long after the cars had gone, and the house grew quiet again. It wasn't joyous or careless, not the kind that bubbles up when life surprises you with something good. No, Marissa's laugh had a sharpness to it, like the crack of ice breaking in winter, thin and treacherous. Each time I replayed it in my head, I felt the sting in my chest all over again. I sat at the kitchen table with one of my photo albums open, flipping through pages as if the faces might calm me. Gideon, at 5 years old, holding up a sandcastle bucket. Gideon at 10, missing a front tooth, but grinning anyway. My boy, who once raced to greet me after long shifts, shouting, "Mom, you're home," as if nothing mattered more. He had trusted me with every scraped knee, every question about monsters in the closet, every math problem too tangled for him to solve alone. When had that trust thinned into silence, I traced the edge of a photograph, my own handwriting beneath it. First day of middle school. His smile had already grown guarded, his eyes turning toward friends more than toward me. That was natural. Children grow, they search for themselves outside the walls of home. But the real distance came later, after Marissa. She was polished sharp with ambitions she never tried to hide. When Gideon brought her over the first time, I noticed the way she looked at our apartment. Not at me, not at him, but at the space. Measuring, weighing. I told myself it was nerves. I wanted to believe he had chosen someone who would build a life with him, not carve away at his. Yet sitting here now, her laughter still ringing in my ears, I knew better. That sound wasn't just a joke at my expense. It was a declaration. I closed the album and pushed it aside, my hands trembling. For years I had poured myself into Gideon's future, sacrificing vacations, taking double shifts, scraping together savings so he'd never know hunger. And now, in my retirement, in the one home I could finally call mine, I was being written out of the story, like a character no longer needed. Not while I still had breath in me. I stood and walked through each room, my steps steady, though my heart pounded. The suite with the ocean, view the room with the walk-in closet, the modest guest room, they were all mine. Every wall, every window, every board creaking under my feet, had my name on the deed. I whispered it aloud like a charm against invasion, Celia Marwood. When I reached the back door, I looked out at the shed. It hunched against the edge of the yard, paint-peeling windows fogged with dust. The idea that anyone could consign me to that place was laughable if it weren't so cruel. A shed was for tools for storage, maybe for a dream workshop someday, not for a woman who had worked her whole life for dignity. I locked the back door firmly, then the front, testing each handle twice. The sound of tumblers clicking into place steadied me. This villa was more than wood and plaster. It was my sanctuary, my proof that the years had not been wasted. Marissa could laugh all she wanted. Gideon could avert his eyes. But I would not be moved. This house was mine, and I would guard it with every ounce of strength I had left. Could laughter hide a plot already in motion? That night, I barely slept. Each time I closed my eyes, I heard Marissa's laugh echoing down the hallway. I would jolt awake, imagining voices in the rooms above me, imagining the scrape of furniture being shifted by hands that weren't mine. By morning, my resolve had hardened into something sharper than fear. If they thought they could take my house from me, they were going to learn I had ways of seeing through shadows. At breakfast, I made a list neat and orderly, just as I had once cataloged the thousands of books entrusted to me. I had spent decades mastering details, the angle of a call number sticker, the precise placement of a reference tag, and that same discipline would serve me now. Instead of shelving novels and encyclopedias, I would catalog every movement in my home. At the electronics store in town, the young man behind the counter looked startled when I asked about discrete HD security systems. "For your property, ma'am." "Yes," I answered simply. "I want coverage, but I don't want anyone knowing it's there." He blinked, then began showing me small cameras, no bigger than a thumb each, with wireless connection and night vision. I nodded, asked questions, took notes, and chose a set of 6. The bill stung, but it was nothing compared to the cost of being blind in my own house. Back at the villa, I spread the boxes across the kitchen table. Each lens gleamed darkly like a tiny, unblinking eye. I ran my fingers over them, steadying my nerves. If this house was my sanctuary, then these cameras would be its sentinels. Installation took the better part of the afternoon. My hands weren't as quick as they once were, But the patience I had honed shelving dusty archives proved more valuable than speed. I started with the foyer positioning. The first camera high above the front door, angled to catch every entrance. From there, I moved to the kitchen, tucking one beneath a beam, where it would watch the heart of the house without drawing attention. The third I set in the suite upstairs, the very room Marissa had so confidently declared hers. As I tightened the final screw, I whispered under my breath, "Not yours, mine." The hallway was next long and narrow, leading to all 3 bedrooms. A fourth camera there would capture movements between spaces, footsteps at night, whispers outside doors. By the time I reached the shed, dusk had settled. The air was damp with salt and gulls wheeled overhead, as if mocking my labor. The shed smelled of mildew when I stepped inside, its floor-cracked corners draped in cobwebs. I fastened the 5th camera to a beam near the small window, its gaze covering the entire cramped space. A cold shiver traveled my spine as I locked the shed behind me. Last came my own bedroom. It pained me to place a watchful eye in the one place I should feel safe, but if they dared cross my threshold, I wanted proof. The 6th camera sat unobtrusively on a high shelf, disguised among old picture frames. When I finished, I sat on the couch with the control app open on my phone, flipping between feeds. Each room appeared in crisp clarity, the foyer empty, the kitchen, still the suite quiet, the hallway deserted, the shed dark, my bedroom undisturbed. The silence of the screens soothed me, yet I knew their real value would come when that silence broke. For the first time since Marissa's laugh had sliced through me, I exhaled fully. My villa was no longer blind. It could see as clearly as I did, and soon enough it would show me whether my suspicions were paranoia or the beginning of a battle. What secrets would these silent eyes soon uncover? The cameras were silent for days, their feeds showing only the rhythm of my routines. I almost convinced myself I had overreacted. Perhaps Marissa's laugh was just careless cruelty, not evidence of something more sinister. But the memory of that forged page in my deed folder kept me vigilant, checking the app on my phone whenever I left the house. It was a Thursday afternoon when the first alert buzzed. I was in town at the market debating between fresh shrimp and cod when my phone vibrated with a movement notification. My pulse quickened. I stepped aside into the shade of the awning and tapped the screen. The foyer camera came alive. The door had opened, and there she was, Marissa. She stepped inside with a confidence that chilled me. Her hand slipped a set of keys back into her purse, as if she had every right to use them. She didn't knock, didn't call out, didn't hesitate. She closed the door softly behind her and pulled off her sunglasses, scanning the room like a buyer assessing property. I watched in horrified silence as she made her way through the villa. In the kitchen, she opened cabinets, tugged at drawers, and pulled out my spice rack to photograph the shelves behind it. She snapped picture after picture with her phone moving methodically, as though completing an inventory. The camera in the suite caught her next. She threw open the closet doors, measured the span of the wall with a tape measure, and scribbled something in a small notebook. Then she sat on the bed and flipped the mattress halfway over her phone flashlight, shining into the box spring, as if she were searching for hidden valuables. When she leaned close to a dresser drawer, I heard her whisper into her phone, "This will be perfect once we clear her out." My chest tightened. "Clear me out." The words rang louder than the market noise around me. A customer bumped my elbow, apologizing, but I barely heard him. My eyes were glued to the tiny screen, watching Marissa move from room to room, claiming the space as though it already belonged to her. She ended in the hallway, crouching to measure baseboards. Then she walked toward the back door and stepped into the yard. The shed camera lit up. She circled the structure, tugged at the lock, then bent to peer through the dirty glass. Finally, she lifted her phone, snapping a long series of photos from every angle. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The shed, always. The shed. After an hour, she slipped back inside, glancing over her shoulder once, as if wary of being seen. The foyer camera caught her sliding the same keys into the lock as she left, turning it smoothly before pulling the door shut. I stood there on the sidewalk, phone in hand, the paper bag of shrimp forgotten at my feet. The crowd bustled past me, laughter and conversation, but all I could hear was that whisper echoing from the recording. Perfect, once we clear her out. I gathered my groceries with trembling hands and drove back to the villa, my eyes scanning every corner of the driveway, every shadow along the porch. The lock felt strange beneath my palm, as if it no longer belonged to me. Inside, the silence pressed hard against my ears. My home had been entered, examined, measured, and photographed, all with a set of keys I had never given. Where did she get those keys, and who was she reporting to? 3 days passed before the next intrusion arrived, not through my cameras, but directly at my door. I had just come in from the garden, dirt still under my fingernails, when the doorbell rang. Through the glass, I saw a man in a charcoal suit, briefcase in one hand, clipboard in the other. He looked official, polished, and utterly out of place on my porch. "Mrs. Marwood?" he asked when I opened the door. His voice carried the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to appointments, not introductions. "Yes. Can I help you?" He offered a smile and passed me a business card. "Reginald Stone, Certified Public Accountant. I appreciate you making the time for me," he said. "Mrs. Davidson told me you were interested in exploring short-term rental options for your property. Given the location, the numbers look very promising." My pulse slowed, then spiked. "Mrs. Davidson?" "Yes," he said, glancing at his notes. "Marissa Davidson. She explained you wanted a financial analysis of potential rental income, particularly if the suite and main floor were marketed during peak tourist season. Shall we take a quick walkthrough together?" The air in my chest turned solid. Marissa had used her maiden name. I hadn't spoken to her in days yet. Here was a stranger on my doorstep, convinced she had the authority to make plans for my house. "I think there's been a mistake," I said carefully. "I didn't request a consultation." He blinked, clearly thrown off. "Oh, that's odd." She was very specific. He flipped through the clipboard, showing me neat rows of figures. Projected weekly income, comparative rates for nearby properties, even cost estimates for renovating your outbuilding into a studio rental. She said you wanted discretion, so she was handling the initial contact. The outbuilding, the shed again. My stomach clenched. She said that I ask softly. "Yes," Stone replied, tapping his page. "Frankly, the shed conversion is the smartest play. With minimal investment, you could generate $15,000 to $20,000 per summer. Her assumption was you'd move into the smaller space yourself, freeing up the villa for paying guests." His words were calm, professional, as if they made perfect sense. But to me, they landed like stones. Marissa had not only entered my house with stolen keys, she had already begun building a financial future on it, using me as the tenant in the shed and her as the manager. I forced my shoulders back. "Mr. Stone, I never authorized Mrs. Davidson to act on my behalf." Confusion clouded his features. "You didn't." "No, and I have no interest in moving out of my own home." He hesitated, then frowned, perhaps realizing how precarious this made his position. "My apologies. I assure you I only came because she was convincing. She mentioned your age, said you were eager to supplement your retirement income, that you trusted her to handle the details." My hands curled into fists at my sides. My age, my supposed eagerness, my supposed trust. She was wrong, I said, each word measured. "I manage my own affairs." Stone inclined his head quickly, embarrassed now. "Of course. Please forgive the intrusion." He handed me his card again, as if trying to salvage dignity. "If you change your mind, I'd be glad to revisit. No charge for today's consultation." I accepted the card only so I could close the door. When he left, I stood in the quiet foyer, my heart hammering. On the table sat the folder with my deed. Inside, it was the forged addendum, that ghost signature I had tried to dismiss. And now, here was a professional misled by Marissa's voice and name, convinced she held authority. If she could present herself as my decision-maker to an accountant, how far had she already gone? What other signatures had she forged? What other doors had she opened under the pretense of helping me? If she can forge authority to an accountant, what else has she forged? The day after Reginald Stone left my porch, Gideon called. His voice was calm, but there was a faint strain underneath, like a violin string pulled too tight. "Mom, I heard you spoke with someone yesterday." "An accountant," I closed my eyes. "So she told you. She just wants to help," he said quickly. "Marissa thinks, well, we both think that renting out parts of the house could make your retirement easier. It's expensive keeping up a place like that. You shouldn't have to worry about money." "I'm not worried about money," I replied sharper than I intended. "And I never asked Marissa to involve strangers in my life." Silence stretched over the line. I could picture him running a hand over his jaw, the way he did when caught between two choices. "She's just trying to make things easier," he repeated, but even he didn't sound convinced. For whom I asked. He didn't answer, only mumbled something about work and hung up. I stared at the phone long after the call ended, the quiet in my villa heavier than before. That evening, I poured myself tea and turned on the camera feeds. Watching had become habit, a kind of nightly ritual. Most nights the screens showed only empty rooms and shifting shadows of palm branches outside. But tonight was different. I rewound the footage from earlier in the day when I had been at the grocery store. My breath caught the moment the foyer camera flickered to life. Gideon. He stepped inside with Marissa, glancing around nervously as though half expecting me to appear. She carried a slim folder. They walked straight to the dining table and spread papers across it. The kitchen camera caught everything, Marissa sliding a document forward, pointing to a line with her manicured finger. Gideon leaned over. Hesitating lips pressed tight. She whispered something I couldn't hear the words, but her eyes locked onto his, sharp, insistent. He shook his head once, then again. She touched his arm, speaking low, steady. Finally, he exhaled and picked up the pen. I leaned closer to the screen, bile rising. He wrote his name. I paused the footage, staring at the frozen frame, my son, my Gideon, signing something under Marissa's watchful gaze. I advanced the video again, watching his shoulders slump as she gathered the papers quickly back into the folder, her smile triumphant. She kissed his cheek, almost absent-minded, then tucked the documents under her arm. When they left, Gideon looked back toward the camera, toward me, though he didn't know I was watching. His face carried something I hadn't seen before: shame. I sat there in the glow of the monitor, heart pounding. It could have been anything I told myself. Insurance papers, a loan application, something innocent. But deep down, I knew. I knew the set of Marissa's jaw, the way she pressed him, the way he resisted before caving. It was not innocent. It was calculated. Power of attorney. The words hissed in my mind. The forged addendum in my deed folder. The accountant who thought Marissa was in charge. Now Gideon's signature captured in black and white under her guidance. I pressed my palm to my chest, the betrayal cutting deeper than I thought possible. My son, the child I had carried, raised, sacrificed for, might be conspiring to push me out of my own life. Was my own blood now writing me out of my life? 2 days later, The cameras captured them again. I had just settled into bed with a book when my phone buzzed with another movement alert. I tapped the screen expecting perhaps a raccoon nosing near the porch. Instead, the foyer camera lit up with familiar figures. Marissa's arm linked with her mother's. Robert trailed behind, carrying a tape measure. Elaine clutched a notepad as if she were conducting a property survey. Gideon was nowhere in sight. I pressed play, my pulse racing. They moved through the villa as though it already belonged to them, their laughter filling the rooms. The kitchen camera caught Marissa opening the refrigerator, wrinkling her nose, then breezing onto the dining area. She flung open cabinets, gesturing like a hostess, unveiling options. "This will be our entertaining space," she said brightly. "Plenty of room for a longer table, especially when the kids come along." Kids. My grandchildren, unborn, already factored into her plans for my house. They ascended the stairs, the sweet camera showing Marissa, spinning in the center of the room, arms wide. "This will be perfect for Gideon and me. Look at that view and the bathroom. It's basically a spa." Elaine smiled, scribbling in her notebook. Robert measured the wall, calling out dimensions. Then came the line that made my stomach turn to stone. And Mom Marissa said, glancing toward Elaine with a grin, "Don't worry about space. You'll get the walk-in closet room. It's practically designed for you. And Celia," she lowered her voice, but not enough she can age gracefully out in the shed. "With a little work, it'll be cozy." Laughter followed hers sharpest of all. I nearly dropped the phone. My shed. They were still on about the shed. The shed camera flickered to life as they trooped outside. Robert ran his hand along the siding, shaking his head. "Needs new wiring. Probably insulation, too." "Easy enough," Marissa replied. "We can put in laminate flooring paint. The walls maybe add a skylight. It'll be charming." Charming? For me? Elaine peered through the dirty window. She'd have her own space away from the noise. "Exactly," Marissa said, triumphant. She'd think it was independence, but really, it's safer for everyone. The video cut as they circled back toward the house, discussing permits and contractors. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. They weren't just joking anymore. They were planning. The next morning, I forced myself to unlock the shed. The air inside was damp, heavy with mildew. The concrete floor was cracked spiderwebs thick in each corner. Rust crept along the hinges. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, unlit and useless. I stood in the center, the smell of mold stinging my nose. This place wasn't fit for storage, let alone for a person. And yet, they talked about wiring insulation flooring, transforming it into a livable space. For me, I pressed my hand against the splintered wall, imagining their voices echoing in here, deciding what color to paint, where to put a cot, how to disguise their cruelty as kindness. When I stepped back out into the daylight, I pulled the door shut with more force than necessary. The lock rattled in its frame, a flimsy barrier against their designs. From the porch, I could see the ocean stretching wide and endless, a reminder of the freedom I had worked so hard to claim. But the shed squatted in the yard like a warning, its shadow lengthening toward the house. Were they preparing the shed for comfort or for confinement? The knock came mid-morning, sharp and official. When I opened the door, a woman in a navy blazer stood on the porch, a county badge clipped neatly to her lapel. She smiled with the kind of polished warmth that comes from training, not sincerity. "Mrs. Marwood, I'm Jennifer Walsh with County Adult Services. I'm here for a routine wellness check." Her name struck me like a dropped book. Walsh. I remembered hearing it once before, at Gideon and Marissa's wedding reception, spoken over clinking glasses. "Cousin Jennifer." I gripped the doorframe. "I didn't request a check. These are standard." She replied smoothly, stepping 1 foot across the threshold, as though that were enough to grant her entry. Your family expressed some concerns about how you're managing on your own. Just a quick conversation. Family. My jaw tightened, but I forced my voice even. Very well. She followed me into the living room, her eyes darting like a hawk's. Across the shelves, the rugs, the dishes stacked neatly on the counter. She carried a tablet and began tapping immediately. Do you live alone? Yes. Any chronic health issues? No. She glanced up, eyebrows arched in mild disbelief. No heart disease, diabetes, memory concerns. I held her gaze. No. Her fingers moved across the screen. What about your daily routine? Meals, exercise, social connections. I walk the beach every morning. I cook my own meals. I attend a local book group. That last one was a lie. I hadn't joined yet, but I wasn't about to let her paint me as isolated. She nodded, though her expression didn't change. And finances? Are you able to manage bills, property taxes, retirement income? Heat rose in my chest. Yes, I've managed for decades. Why wouldn't I manage now? Her pen paused. Just confirming, ma'am. Sometimes transitions can be overwhelming. Transitions. As though buying my dream home was the prelude to collapse. When she finally rose to leave, I felt wrung out. She thanked me for my time, assured me it was just protocol, then slipped a business card onto the coffee table. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving the house too quiet. I stared at the card, her name, bold in block letters, the county seal embossed in the corner. My hands trembled as I picked up the tablet she had briefly set down on the sofa cushion while collecting her bag. She must have forgotten that the screen was still lit. I froze. There in the middle of her notes was my name, Celia Marwood, and beneath it, under the heading Primary Caregiver, was another name, Marissa Davidson. My throat constricted. The file had been created before Jennifer ever stepped into my home. I scrolled further down. Notes already drafted. Subject may be at risk due to age and isolation. Possible financial vulnerability. Recommend follow-up evaluation. The room tilted. This wasn't an innocent visit. This was a net already woven, and I was the fish thrashing inside. A creak from the porch snapped me out of it. I set the tablet exactly where she had left it, my heart slamming against my ribs. Moments later, she returned, apologizing for forgetting it. I nodded, my face a mask. Inside, fury and fear braided tight. When she drove away, I sat motionless in the armchair, staring at the empty doorway. My suspicions had just gained flesh. Marissa hadn't simply whispered her schemes within these walls, she had carried them into government offices, where signatures and seals could be twisted into weapons. I picked up Jennifer's card again, holding it between my fingers until it bent. My own name already listed as dependent. Marissa's name already stamped as my caretaker. How many doors had Marissa already opened into government offices? 2 mornings after Jennifer's visit, the doorbell rang again. I hesitated before answering, dread curling in my stomach. Standing on my porch this time was a man in his early 60s, his silver hair combed neatly back, a stethoscope draped casually around his neck, as though it were jewelry. He wore a navy blazer, carried a leather briefcase, and offered a genial smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Mrs. Marwood?" he asked. "I'm Dr. Harold Pike. I'm a geriatric specialist. Your family expressed concerns about you, and I thought I'd stop by to conduct a wellness assessment." My pulse hammered. Family again. Always family. I forced calm into my voice. I didn't request a doctor. He gave a sympathetic nod, as though I were a child resisting medicine. Of course. Sometimes older adults hesitate, but these evaluations are in your best interest. It will only take a few minutes. Against every instinct, I let him in. To refuse outright would be painted as obstinance. Better to let him see what I wanted him to see. We sat at the kitchen table. He opened a folder, his pen poised. "Let's begin with orientation. Can you tell me today's date? I did. And the current president, I answered, without hesitation. Excellent, he murmured, jotting notes. And tell me, why did you move here to Myrtle Beach? I folded my hands, steady. Because I worked 30 years, saved carefully, and I wanted to live beside the ocean in my retirement. His eyes flicked up. Was this decision discussed with family members first? I felt the trap in the question, but answered plainly. No. It was my money, my decision. I don't need permission. He scribbled more notes, the pen scratching faster. Next came memory prompts, recall. 3 objects he listed. Count backward by 7s, repeat a sequence of numbers. I passed each with ease, though the way he nodded made it feel like he was already writing a different story. When the questions ended, he leaned back. You're articulate and oriented. Still, transitions like these can sometimes mask underlying issues. Isolation, impulsive financial choices. These raise concerns. My jaw clenched. Buying my home was not impulsive. He offered a placid smile. I understand, but your daughter-in-law indicated I cut him off. Marissa is not my medical proxy. That finally rattled him. His smile slipped a fraction, but he recovered quickly, closing his folder. This was only preliminary. I'll prepare a report for the county. Thank you for your time. I escorted him to the door, each step heavy with the realization that another record would soon exist, with my name on it, shaded by someone else's interpretation. When he was gone, I returned to the table and stared at the imprint of his pen mark still faintly visible on the top sheet. He had taken my confidence, my clarity, and twisted them into potential symptoms. What I had built over decades, discipline, independence, rational judgment, was being recast as evidence of fragility. I sank into the chair, rubbing my temples. First, the accountant, then the social worker, now a doctor. Each one had walked through my door as if invited, armed with official badges and titles, each ready to write my story for me. And still, through every question, every test I had, felt Marissa's hand behind it, pulling the strings. Would they twist my independence into proof of decline? The call came just as I was finishing lunch. The number on the screen belonged to my bank. I answered cautiously, a tightness already forming in my chest. Mrs. Marwood said, a measured voice. This is Stephen Yates, assistant manager at Coastal Federal. I'd like to verify some recent inquiries regarding your accounts. My fork froze in midair. Inquiries by whom, your son Gideon? He replied. The calmness in his tone carried an undercurrent of unease. He visited the branch yesterday, asking questions about your balances, recent transactions, and specifically the purchase of your property. He suggested there may be concerns about your ability to manage finances independently. The words landed like a slap. Concerns, I echoed. Yes, ma'am. He mentioned you'd made significant withdrawals and implied they were imprudent. He asked about protocols for reporting suspicious elder activity. My throat burned. Gideon, my boy, who once carried a toy dump truck through the halls of our little starter home, now planting seeds of doubt about my sanity at my own bank. What did you tell him? I asked, my voice low. That we cannot disclose details of any account without explicit authorization. But Mrs. Marwood, he also asked about procedures for initiating a power of attorney arrangement, citing family worries. He didn't file formal paperwork, but the fact he raised it compelled me to call you directly. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. Power of attorney. There it was again, like a dark drumbeat echoing through every intrusion. The accountant, the social worker, the doctor. Each step circling closer to stripping me of control. Has anything been filed? I demanded. No, ma'am, nothing official. But if someone were to provide documents, say notarized papers or court instructions, we'd be bound to review them. I want you to be aware of the possibility. My breath came short. The forged addendum in my deed packet flashed across my mind. If Marissa could mimic my signature there, What stopped her from producing another document with even higher stakes? "Mr. Yates," I said, forcing composure, "let the record show that I have not granted anyone power of attorney. And I have no intention of doing so." "Understood," he replied. "I'll make a note in your file. May I suggest you come in personally to review additional safeguards? We can require in-person identification for all changes, set up alerts, and flag unauthorized attempts." "Yes," I whispered. "I'll come tomorrow." After hanging up, I sat staring at the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. The house felt smaller, the air heavier. My own son had stepped into the bank I had trusted for decades and tried to slide a shadow over my name. He hadn't succeeded yet, but the mere attempt left me shaking. I walked to the desk in the corner of the living room and pulled out the folder that held my financial statements neat and orderly, just as I had always kept them. Numbers had always made sense to me, steady, reliable like a card catalog in perfect alphabetical order. But now, even those clean columns felt fragile, vulnerable to erasure if someone else's hand got hold of them. I thought of Gideon's face in the camera footage bent over papers as Marissa guided his pen, of his voice on the phone trying to justify her meddling, of his silence when I demanded answers. If the bank had already been approached, if my name was already being whispered as unfit, then the battle wasn't just about the villa anymore. It was about everything I had earned, every dollar saved from long nights in the library, every cent meant to buy the dignity of independence. Was I already losing control of my savings without signing a thing? The morning after the bank call, I knew I couldn't stand alone anymore. Every move Marissa made was gaining momentum, each thread pulling tighter around me. If I didn't seek help, I would find myself tangled in a web too strong to cut through. That afternoon, I sat across from a man whose name had been given to me by a neighbor at the market, Thaddeus Crane, attorney at law. His office overlooked a stretch of marshland, the reeds swaying as if whispering secrets. He was in his early 70s, white-haired, deliberate in every gesture. When he folded his hands on the desk, they were steady, the kind of hands that had signed papers and built defenses for a lifetime. "I've read the notes you sent ahead," he said, his voice deep, unhurried. "Mrs. Marwood, let me be blunt. This isn't paranoia. What you're describing is elder financial abuse in formation." The words landed heavy, but also clarifying. Abuse. Formation. He wasn't dismissing me, wasn't softening it with euphemism. "They've contacted accountants, doctors, social services, and even your bank," he continued. "Each contact is like a brick in a wall they're building around you. If you don't intervene one day, you'll wake up and discover you've been declared incompetent with all your assets transferred into a trust you don't control." I gripped the edge of the chair, my throat dry. "And my son." He leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. Children are often persuaded into these schemes, sometimes willingly, sometimes through manipulation. It matters less whether he believes it than the fact that he's participating. My stomach clenched. What do I do? He opened a legal pad and began sketching out steps. First, keep recording. Your cameras are your best allies. Don't just collect video, keep backups, preferably in a cloud system they can't touch. Second, cooperate in public. When social workers come, when doctors arrive, answer politely, calmly, even when their questions are insulting. Show them you are lucid, reasonable, and in control. Don't give them ammunition. I nodded slowly. Third, he said, tapping his pen against the pad, trap them privately. Let them speak freely when they think you're unguarded. Don't argue, don't threaten. Just document. Each recording becomes a nail in their coffin if this goes to court. I studied his lined face, noting the glint of satisfaction when he spoke the last words. He'd seen battles like this before and relished building airtight defenses. "And if they've already forged documents?" I asked quietly. His expression hardened. "Then we expose them. Forgery is criminal, not just civil. With enough proof, the district attorney would be compelled to prosecute. It's one thing to squabble over inheritance, it's another to falsify authority and tamper with a deed. I thought of the addendum slipped into my property folder, the signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. I had dismissed it as clerical error. Now it burned in my memory as a warning I had nearly ignored. Thaddeus closed the pad and clasped his hands again. You are not helpless, Mrs. Marwood. You're facing people who play dirty, yes. But if you stay disciplined, you can outplay them. The key is not letting emotion dictate your response. They will expect outrage, confusion, even despair. What they won't expect is precision. I breathed slowly, steadying myself. Precision had been the hallmark of my life. Every card catalog in order, every book shelved correctly. If precision could protect my library for 30 years, then perhaps it could protect my life now. When I left his office, the marsh grass swayed again in the breeze. It no longer whispered secrets. It whispered strategy. How do you outplay family who already play dirty? The knock this time was heavier, less polite. When I opened the door, 2 women stood on my porch, clipboards in hand, the county seal printed at the top of their folders. Their blazers looked identical to Jennifer Walsh's, though their faces were unfamiliar. Mrs. Marwood, the taller one, began. We're with Adult Protective Services. We've received multiple reports concerning your well-being. May we come in reports? Multiple. My pulse fluttered, but I forced my smile steady. Of course. Please. They stepped inside, their eyes sweeping the living room, much the way Jennifer's had, measuring, noting, evaluating. One sat on the sofa, the other pulled up a chair at the dining table. Their pens were already poised. Can you tell us how long you've lived here? 3 months, I answered. And do you manage your own meals? Yes. I cook every day. Would you like to see my pantry? They glanced at each other. One nodded. I led them into the kitchen. Opened cabinets showed them neatly stacked tins, bags of flour sealed tight, produce fresh in bowls. Do you handle your own finances? I do. I have a retirement account, a pension, and I manage all bills online. Would you like to see my system? I showed them the organized folder on my desk, statements filed in chronological order. Their pens scratched quickly, but neither looked reassured. Back in the living room, the questions turned sharper. What year is it, 2025? And the current president, I answered, without hesitation. They pressed further. Why did you move to Myrtle Beach? I kept my tone even. Because I worked for 30 years, saved carefully, and wanted to retire by the ocean. This villa is my choice. My sanctuary. I saw one. Raise her brow, whisper something to the other. Uneasy looks exchanged like coded messages. They weren't hearing my answers. They were cataloging doubts. After 40 minutes, they closed their clipboards. We'll compile our notes and follow up. In the meantime, if you need resources for assistance, we'll provide contacts. I don't need assistance, I said softly. But they were already halfway to the door. When it shut behind them, I leaned against it, my knees trembling. I had answered every question, perfectly demonstrated competence, yet I could see it in their eyes. Suspicion lingered. That night, reviewing camera feeds became ritual again. I tapped through each view until one recording from the exterior camera froze me. The 2 county workers, standing in the parking lot of a cafe just down the road. And with them, Marissa. She leaned across the table, her expression sharp, confident. The camera's microphone couldn't pick up their words from that distance, but her gestures told the story. Pointing toward my villa, sketching shapes on a napkin, leaning close as they nodded. Coaching. One worker pushed back uneasily, shaking her head, but Marissa pressed on, smiling, that bright smile she always used when she wanted something. I sat in the glow of the screen, fury rising hot and steady. They weren't just coming on their own. She was pulling them, guiding them, feeding them doubts to carve into official reports. The very system meant to protect me was becoming her weapon. What happens when the very system meant to protect me becomes her weapon? The day after the county visit, I sat once again in Thaddeus Crane's office, the marsh grass beyond the window, bending violently in the rising wind. The radio on his desk whispered of a storm pushing up the coast, heavy rain, fierce gusts, maybe even flooding. I couldn't help but feel the forecast was more than weather. It was prophecy. Thaddeus listened quietly as I described the two women with clipboards, their questions, their uneasy glances. When I told him about the footage of Marissa, with them afterward, his lips pressed into a grim line. "Good," he said finally. "Not good that they came, but good that you caught her with them. That recording is your trump card. It shows collusion. It undercuts every so-called concern they've written about you." I slid a flash drive across his desk. "It's all here. Every clip. Marissa entering with keys, whispering into her phone, measuring my rooms, coaching the social workers. Even Gideon signing papers." Thaddeus tapped the drive with one finger. "This is enough to shift everything, but it won't matter if you lose your composure in front of them. They'll seize on the smallest crack, irritation, defensiveness, even just raising your voice. You must be calm, collected, reasonable." His eyes locked on mine. "Can you do that?" I thought of the decades I had spent as head librarian, breaking up squabbles between teenagers, fielding irate patrons, enduring budget meetings where my department was dismissed as unnecessary. I had trained for calm my entire career. "Yes," I said firmly. "I can." "Then here's what we'll do," he continued. "We'll allow them their final confrontation. I'll be present but silent unless absolutely necessary. You will answer every question with clarity, with patience, and with courtesy. Let them underestimate you. When they press, don't resist, redirect. And then at the right moment, we present the evidence." I nodded, already rehearsing in my mind. That evening back at the villa, I set the flash drive carefully into my desk drawer, then opened my laptop. I spent hours curating the recordings, snipping each video to the most damning moments, labeling them with dates and times. I played them over and over until I could recite the sequence by memory. Marissa, whispering, "This will be perfect once we clear her out." Gideon, bending over a page pen, trembling in his hand. Jennifer Walsh's tablet showing Marissa Davidson, primary caregiver. The accountant saying her maiden name as if it carried authority. And finally, Marissa outside the cafe, leaning across the table to the county workers, her gestures unmistakable. Each clip was a stone. Together they were a fortress. I practiced my responses aloud, pacing the living room. Yes, I handle my finances. Yes, I cook my meals. No, I have not authorized anyone to act on my behalf. I modulated my tone, calm, steady, almost gentle. I wanted them to hear reason, not resistance. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Palm fronds bent low, scraping against the windows. The ocean roared louder than usual, the tide pushing higher onto the sand. It was as though the world itself was bracing for a clash. Before bed, I stood on the porch, watching lightning crack far out at sea. The air smelled of salt and ozone, heavy with the promise of rain. Somewhere behind me, the shed loomed in shadow, still and silent, but I felt its presence as keenly as the storm on the horizon. The battle was coming one way or another. When the storm breaks, who will drown? The storm broke the night we agreed to meet. Rain pelted the windows with relentless fury, and the wind howled through the gaps of the shutters. Lightning flared across the horizon as Gideon and Marissa stepped into my villa, damp coats clinging to their shoulders. Behind them, thunder rolled like a drumbeat announcing war. I had set the living room deliberately, lamps-lit chairs, arranged my laptop waiting on the coffee table. Thaddeus sat silently in the corner, his presence unspoken but steady. I rose from my chair, hands folded in front of me. "Before we begin," I said, my voice calm, though my heart raced, "I want you to know that this conversation is being recorded." Marissa's eyes flickered, but she recovered quickly, smoothing her hair. "That's fine," she said brightly, her voice edged with steel. "In fact, I brought something too." She reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek tablet. With a tap, a video began to play. On the screen was me sitting in this very room, fumbling with papers. My words were scattered, my tone frail. I don't know what this bill means," the recording version of me stammered. "I'm forgetting so much these days." Marissa turned the screen toward Gideon with a flourish. "Do you see? This is what I've been dealing with. Your mother is slipping Gideon. She's not safe alone." My breath caught. The footage was real, but spliced, rearranged, clipped out of context. I recognized fragments of sentences I had spoken months ago when explaining how I was sorting old medical bills after moving. She had edited them into something damning. Gideon's brow furrowed. He stared at the screen, then at me. For a moment, doubt flickered across his face and my chest tightened. My own son wavering. Marissa pressed her advantage. "This isn't about control. It's about care. She can't admit it, but she needs help. We've documented everything." I steadied myself, then reached for the laptop. "If you want to speak of documentation," I said, "let's show all of it." With a keystroke, the first clip lit up the television. Marissa walking boldly through my kitchen, whispering into her phone. "This will be perfect once we clear her out." The room fell silent, except for the storm battering the windows. The second clip played Gideon at the table pen in hand, Marissa's finger guiding the line, his signature inked onto an unfamiliar document, his face drained of color as he saw himself on the screen. Marissa shifted uneasily. "That could mean anything. Then let's watch more," I said, my voice steady. The accountant's visit filled the screen, his words clear, his clipboard in view. "Mrs. Davidson said you wanted rental conversions." Thaddeus leaned forward slightly, his presence like a hammer ready to fall. "Unedited, time-stamped, authenticated," he said. I turned back to my son. His eyes darted between the doctored video in Marissa's hands and the raw feed on my screen. For a moment, conflict tore across his features, loyalty to his wife battling with the truth flashing before him. Finally, I let the last clip roll. Marissa at the cafe, gesturing to the county workers coaching their notes. Her smile sharp, her hands painting false narratives in the air. When the screen went black, the thunder outside crashed like punctuation. The room held its breath. Would they surrender or double down? The storm hammered the villa, thunder shaking the walls as if urging me forward. I stood while they sat, Marissa clutching her tablet like a shield, Gideon's hands limp on his knees. The silence between us was sharp, broken, only by the rattling of rain against the windows. "This ends tonight," I said. My voice surprised even me, low, steady, unflinching. "You will return every key you've copied. You will contact every professional you dragged into this, accountants, doctors, social workers, and you will retract every word, and you will cut off any claim, written or spoken, that this house belongs to anyone but me." Marissa opened her mouth, but Thaddeus's voice cut across the storm. Calm, deliberate, the voice of law. "Mrs. Marwood is being generous. You should understand the consequences if she isn't. Fraud, conspiracy, elder financial abuse, making false statements to government officials. Any one of these could bring charges. Combined, they could mean prison time." The color drained from Marissa's face. She sat back, fingers trembling around her tablet. "You can't?" "I can," Thaddeus said evenly. "And with the recordings, it's not even a difficult case. Judges don't look kindly on schemes against the elderly, particularly when they involve forged authority or tampered reports. Gideon's shoulders sagged, and for the first time that night, his mask cracked. His voice broke as he whispered, "I never wanted this, Mom. I thought it was just planning for the future." She said it was for your own good. My throat ached, but I forced myself to stay firm. You stood beside her while she tried to erase me. You signed papers. You let her speak for me when I was still here to speak for myself. He bowed his head, tears glinting in the lamplight. Marissa, meanwhile, looked like a cornered fox. She darted glances between Thaddeus and me, her lips trembling, but her jaw clenched tight. If we take it all back, people will think we lied. Our reputations, our jobs. You thought nothing of ruining mine, I said. Now you'll tell the truth, or the truth will come out in court. Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the room in stark white. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Gideon slid his hand into his pocket, pulled out a small ring of keys, and laid them on the table. The sound of metal against wood was sharp final. "I'll make the calls," he whispered. "I'll fix this." Marissa flinched as though struck. Gideon. But his voice, though cracked, carried more strength than I had heard in years. "No, I'm done." Thaddeus leaned back, watching satisfied. "Good. You'll both put in writing that all claims were false. Mrs. Marwood keeps copies. Any failure to follow through, and I file charges immediately." The air in the room shifted then. For the first time in months, I felt the balance tilt back toward me. My home, my life, my independence wrested from their claws not by pleading, but by standing firm. Marissa's panic finally broke through. Her hands shook as she gathered her things, her face pale, her voice a whisper drowned by the storm. "Fine. We'll do it." I looked at her and saw not triumph, but desperation, the gleam of someone who might still claw for one more chance, one more scheme, one more betrayal. They rose to leave Gideon silent, Marissa trembling, the storm beating around us like a warning drum. But what if desperation drove them to one last strike? The storm passed, leaving broken branches scattered across the beach road and salt spray dried white on my windows. But inside my villa, the air felt different, lighter, clearer, as though the house itself knew it had been reclaimed. In the weeks that followed, the dominoes fell quickly. One by one, the professionals who had once walked through my door called or wrote with formal apologies. The accountant, red-faced, admitted he'd been misled. Dr. Pike retracted his notes, citing miscommunication. Even Jennifer Walsh filed an amended report that effectively erased her earlier claims. Adult Protective Services closed the case without another visit, their file sealed with a bland line, "No concerns at this time." Thaddeus handled the paperwork like the seasoned fighter. He was insisting that every retraction be written, signed, and notarized. I kept copies neatly filed in my desk, the weight of them reassuring. Proof that the walls they had tried to build around me had crumbled under their own deceit. As for Gideon and Marissa, they disappeared from my life almost overnight. A letter arrived once from Gideon, shaky handwriting on lined paper. He apologized for his weakness for the signature, for choosing silence when he should have chosen me. I read it, folded it carefully, and placed it in the drawer beneath the retractions. Forgiveness would take time, perhaps longer than either of us had. But at least the words existed. Marissa never wrote at all. Peace crept back into my days, soft and steady. I joined a local book club that met every Thursday morning at the community center. The women there, Elaine with her quick wit, Margot with her encyclopedic memory of every mystery novel ever written, welcomed me without questions, without suspicion. Their laughter filled the gaps that fear had left behind. Each morning, I still woke early, brewed coffee, and carried it to the porch. The Atlantic stretched out before me, endless and alive, the sunrise painting, the waves in strokes of rose and gold. I breathed deeply, letting the salt air wash through me, and reminded myself that this was mine, not theirs, mine. One evening, as I straightened the desk drawers, I came across the small brass spare key I had once pressed into Gideon's hand years ago, long before Marissa. I held it for a long time, its weight heavy with memory, then slid it into the back of the drawer and turned the lock. Not for intrusion, I whispered to the empty room, only for respect. The words lingered, both promise and warning. I had learned through bitter trial that family could fracture and systems could fail. But dignity earned, defended, cherished was something no storm could wash away. The next morning, coffee warm in my palms, I watched the sun climb over the water and heard the voices of my new friends calling from the dunes, inviting me to join them for our walk. I smiled, set the cup down, and rose. When respect finally knocks at your door, will you open or guard it forever?